Hey everyone, welcome back. Ready for another deep dive. Today we're tackling something I think you'll find pretty fascinating. We're going to be looking at how caste influences marriage decisions in modern India.
Interesting topic.
Yeah, and specifically we're focusing on highly educated, urban, middle-class folks. It might be more complex than you think. Our main source for this deep dive is some really interesting research from the American Economic Journal.
Ah, okay. Sounds like a good one.
Yeah, I think so. We'll uncover how economists went about studying this, what they found out about people's preferences when it comes to marriage, and whether those preferences actually impact who ends up marrying whom. That last part is key.
Makes sense. I'm intrigued.
Me too. So
Yeah.
to kick things off, the research actually frames marriage as like an economic decision, which when you think about it, especially for women in India, it kind of makes sense.
Right. I mean, marriage can totally impact a woman's financial future, especially in a context like India.
Absolutely. But here's the thing, even with all the modernization happening, you'd think maybe caste would become less important, right?
Yeah. Seems logical.
Well, not quite. The researchers found that a whopping 74% of Indians they surveyed still opposed intercaste marriage.
Wow. 74%? That's huge. I wouldn't have guessed that.
Right. It's way more than you might expect. It really shows how deeply ingrained these ideas still are.
Definitely makes you rethink some assumptions about modernization and social change, huh?
Totally. So we've got this economic angle and this persistence of caste. But how did they actually study this stuff? Did they just ask people about their preferences?
Well, they did do surveys, but they went a step further, which I think is really clever. To see what people really prioritize, they analyzed matrimonial ads from the early 2000s, sort of like the early versions of online dating profiles.
Ah, so it's like seeing someone's actual shopping cart versus just asking them what kind of stuff they
Yeah.
like.
Precisely. Revealed preferences in action. And what did they find? Even controlling for education and income, people strongly preferred marrying within their caste. Not about marrying up in the hierarchy, but more of a pull towards similarity.
Wow, that is fascinating. So it's not just about climbing the social ladder or anything like that. It's really about sticking with your own group.
Yeah, really makes you think about the power of those in-group preferences, even when other factors you'd think would be more important, like education or income.
Right. Okay, so then why? Why is this preference so strong? Even in this modern context, what's going on there?
Well, to understand this, the researchers created a whole economic model, and they even came up with this concept called the price of caste, which I found super interesting.
Price of caste. Okay, you got to explain that one. What does that even mean?
Think of it as what someone's willing to give up, like in terms of other desirable traits in a partner in order to marry within their own caste.
Hmm. Okay, I think I'm following. So is it are they saying people will, I don't know, settle for someone less educated or something like that if it means marrying within their caste?
It's more nuanced than that, but you're on the right track. The study found that this price, what people are willing to give up, is actually quite low, W, especially compared to the price of education, for instance.
Hold on. So you're telling me people are more willing to compromise on education
Okay.
than on caste when choosing a spouse?
It seems counterintuitive, right? But that's what the data suggests.
Wow. So it's not just about analyzing preferences. They wanted to see if those preferences actually played out in who people ended up marrying, right? Like, did those preferences actually translate into real-world decisions?
Exactly. But they didn't, follow everyone around for years to see who got hitched. They actually used their findings to simulate a whole marriage market. It's pretty cool. They used something called the Gale-Shapley algorithm.
The Gale-Shapley.
Yeah.
What now? That sounds pretty complicated.
It is a bit technical. Basically, it's a way to create stable matches based on people's stated preferences. Think of it like a really sophisticated matchmaking algorithm. They plugged in all that data from those matrimonial ads and let the model do its thing.
Okay, so they built this fancy model. But the big question is, did it actually work? Did it predict what happened in real life?
That's the thing. It did. They compared the model's predictions to actual marriage records a year later, and it lined up pretty darn well.
No way. So the simulated matches were pretty close to who actually ended up getting married.
Yep. It's wild, right? Those preferences have real-world consequences. It's not just theory. It really highlights the fact that tradition, these social structures, can still have a big impact even when you've got rapid modernization and economic growth happening all around.
Absolutely. I mean, it makes you wonder, does economic progress, on its own, really weaken caste's hold on marriage decisions? Or is there something more to it?
Really good question. It's more complicated than you might think. Yeah, it doesn't seem like there's a straightforward answer. The researchers didn't find evidence that people were marrying outside their caste just to kind of climb that economic ladder.
Hmm. Interesting. So it seems like that, what was it, horizontal, was it? That horizontal pull was stronger?
Right, exactly. That pull towards similarity, staying within their own group. But here's where things get kind of even more interesting. The study suggests that if caste magically became less important in these marriage decisions, we might actually see, get this, more inequality
Yeah.
based on things like income and education.
Wait, hold on. Really? More inequality? That seems kind of backwards. Wouldn't less emphasis on caste make things more, equal?
Well, think about it this way. If people aren't putting as much weight on caste, they might start putting even more emphasis on those other things, like how much money someone makes or their education level. Like they're shifting their focus to a different set of criteria for a good partner.
Okay, I see what you're saying. So it's like if caste is less important, people might double down on those other markers of status, and that could actually lead to greater economic divisions.
Exactly. And that could create a situation where the gap between different socioeconomic groups just keeps getting wider. The rich get richer, so to speak.
Yeah, not great. So we've got tradition, we've got individual choices, and then we've got these potential unintended consequences of trying to change those traditions. It's complicated.
No kidding. It's definitely not simple. This whole deep dive is really showing us just how nuanced this relationship is between caste and marriage in modern India. I mean, it's not what you'd think at first glance.
Totally agree. It really is like peeling back the layers of an onion. But okay, so zooming out a bit, what about the bigger picture? What does all this tell us about, like, social change in general and how tough it is to break down some of those traditional norms?
Well, I think it definitely challenges some of those common assumptions we have. We often think that if a country is developing economically, modernizing, things like caste will just naturally fade away. But this study is kind of saying, hold on, not so fast.
Right. More money doesn't just automatically equal less tradition. It's way more complex than that.
For sure, social change is messy. It's complicated. And this research reminds us that even in a place like India that's developing so rapidly, these deep-rooted social structures can be really powerful. They can still have a huge influence on people's lives.
It makes you think, if these preferences for in-caste marriage are so ingrained, are they like set in stone? Is there any possibility of a future where caste just matters less?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? I mean, the study doesn't give us all the answers, but it definitely gives us a lot to think about.
Like what? Give us an example.
Well, think about who this study focused on. Highly educated, urban, middle-class folks in India, right? So, one thing that pops into my head is, would these same findings apply to other parts of the country? Like, what about rural areas? Or even, think bigger, what about other cultures with strong group identities? Would the same patterns hold up?
Yeah, those are good questions. I mean, would things look different in a village versus a big city? How much does location play a role?
Exactly. And even within India, there are so many regional differences, religious variations within the caste system itself. Could be a whole other deep dive right there.
So much to explore. It feels like we're just scratching the surface.
Totally. That's what I love about these deep dives. It makes you realize how much more there is to learn. Opens up all these new questions.
Speaking of new questions, there's one that's been bugging me this whole time. Like, what if, just hear me out, what if there were literally no downsides to marrying outside your caste?
Okay, I'm listening. What do you mean no downsides, though? Spell it out for me.
I mean, like, zero social stigma, zero economic disadvantage, no pressure from your family, your community, anything like that. A totally level playing field. Do you think people would, I don't know, actually change their preferences then? Or would it still be, like, ingrained, that pull to marry within their caste?
Whoa. That is a thought-provoking question. It really makes you think about how much of this is cultural conditioning versus just our own individual free will.
Right. Like, can you ever truly separate those things?
I don't know. It's tough to say. I think it's probably always a mix, right? Social norms, A&D, individual choices are constantly kind of pushing and pulling on each other.
Kind of mind-blowing, right? Makes you question how much control we actually have over our own choices.
Yeah. It's like we're all influenced by these invisible forces, whether we realize it or not.
Totally. And I think this research, looking at caste and marriage in India, really brings that home, don't you think?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this deep dive has really highlighted how much we need to think beyond just like what individuals say they want. You can't just look at people's choices in isolation. You have to consider all those social and cultural forces that are shaping those choices in the first place.
Exactly. Like asking someone, what do you want in a partner, might get you a very different answer than actually looking at who they end up with. And those differences tell us something really important.
Right. And that's what I find so valuable about research like this. It gives us a more, you know, nuanced and sophisticated way to think about these issues.
It's like you said earlier, it makes us challenge those assumptions. It forces us to grapple with the fact that social change isn't always neat and tidy and predictable.
For sure. And, at the end of the day, that kind of thinking helps us understand ourselves better and the world around us.
Well, I got to say, I learned a ton from this deep dive. I really thought I knew something about this topic, caste and marriage in India. But wow, it's way more complex than I ever imagined.
I'm glad. That's the best part, right? We start with a question and we end up with even more questions. That's how you know it was a good deep dive.
I couldn't agree more. It really leaves you wanting to learn more, keep digging. So, to everyone listening out there, we hope this has gotten your wheels turning too. Maybe spark some new ideas.
Yeah, whether you're into the whole Indian caste system thing or just
Yeah,
thinking about marriage in general, or even how these social norms play out in our own lives, I think there's a lot here for everyone to chew on.
exactly. So keep those brains buzzing and keep diving deep. Thanks for joining us.